Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Peter and Elizabeth's conversation on the shadow. So, Peter, perhaps you can introduce yourself.
Yes. Hi, Elizabeth. Hi, everyone. So my name is Peter Metzner, and I do executive and leadership coaching and work with the ILCT and have worked with Elizabeth on the use of dreams in coaching. Prior to that, I taught psychology for 13 years and had a stint at the Center for Creative Leadership. And the unconscious, how it manifests in dreams, as well as the shadow, is of real interest to me. So that's our conversation.
Thanks for that, Peter. And as for me, I'm Elizabeth or Elizabeth-Anne Stewart. Yes, I teach with Peter classes on narrative coaching. I come from a background of spirituality, theology, and literature. And so the imagination and the world of dreams and images have been very important to me, but also in terms of spiritual direction and life coaching, I find that this world is very life enhancing. So the whole world of the unconscious just seems to fit really with what I love to do the most. So having said that, Peter, perhaps you can introduce the shadow as a concept.
Okay, so generally the shadow is what we're not aware of. We have this conscious idea of who we are, and the shadow is normally thought of as those repressed, unsavory aspects of ourselves that we don't want to bring to light. And thus, the problem is they exert a tremendous amount of influence on us. And they can also be the gold, those talents, those abilities that we've also not become aware of that may be in our unconscious. And if we don't bring them to light, we may feel like we're missing the boat if we're not using our talents or abilities. So the shadow is what we're unaware of. And with that unawareness, I think Carl Jung said it best, what we're unaware of will manifest itself as fate. So thus it's really important to have a connection to it so that we are more aware and thus better able to navigate the complexities of life in a conscious way rather than an unconscious automatic way.
And I think the image of the iceberg, which is Carl Jung's image anyway, helps us look at that boat you mentioned. A good segue there. So for Carl Jung, the iceberg was a great image of the tip of the iceberg represented the unconscious, and anything below the waterline was something that people were, or still are, unaware of, unconscious of, or have deliberately repressed, as Peter pointed out. And so what we need to do to become individuated whole human beings is bring from under the surface all those hidden, repressed parts of ourselves that we've ignored and bring them to the surface very gradually. You can't do this work too quickly. It needs to be done gradually, helpful, and hopefully with a helper along the way. And the more that comes to the surface, the lower the waterline for the iceberg. So there's more that's visible on the top, and what's underneath is diminishing. What do you think of that image, Peter?
Yeah, I think that's a really good image that what is behind us is so much underneath us is so much greater than what's above us. Isaac Newton said a quote I'll never forget that to myself, I'm like a child playing at the beach while vast oceans of truth lie undiscovered before me. So in many ways, we are like children at a beach, and that ocean has such depth that can bring us wisdom, insight, and activate our potentialities, as well as sabotage the things that we most desperately want in our waking lives.
Absolutely. And that's what's so remarkable about the shadow. It can either be this source of sabotage, or it can be a source of enrichment when we recognize it. So, for example, in a dream, when one is being pursued by a shadow figure, some monster with a knife or some demon that's about to claw you to bits, the best thing one can do is to turn around and say to the figure, who are you? What do you want of me? And as soon as you've named the shadow, what is it? What is this thing? It loses its power. And the insight is like a gift, as you said, it's like gold. So fear becomes gold, and anything that was previously untapped into becomes our wealth, you might say.
That's right. That's right. And so then, thus the connection to it. Now, if we looked at the, let's say, the unsavory pieces that we repress. Think about Nazi Germany. The Germans repressed all these horrific aspects of themselves, and they projected onto the Jews that they were trying to take over the country, take over the finance, the universities, the German women. And these are all the things that the Nazis had done. So all the unsavory parts that the Nazis were actually doing, they projected onto the Jews. So this was their shadow. And even today, Germans, one of the top qualities that a German male looks for in a woman is thrift. And that was something that they also tried to project onto the Jews. So all these parts, if we're not aware, we tend to project onto outgroups. And so there's a collective danger of a collective shadow that seems to happen throughout history. And while technology advances, our human awareness and consciousness, for some reason, doesn't seem to advance at the same rate.
And in fact, what seems to happen is that sometimes this shadow becomes generational, and it goes from one generation to the next. And I think here in the United States, the shadow of racism is one. The shadow of how we treated the indigenous peoples is another. The shadow of how different ethnic groups or racial groups have been welcomed or not welcomed to this land is another. And so those shadows then affect society, and it goes from one generation to the next until there's recognition. And people say, hey, is there a connection between the social conditions we're experiencing in this place and something that happened a couple of centuries ago? And
Yes.
indeed, there sometimes is.
Yes, Mark Twain said that history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes, but we're seeing this kind of pattern over and over and over again. And we have to become aware, we have to heal so that we can create something that's better and not constantly go to these destructive patterns that seem to occur over and over, whether it be collectively or individually in our own lives.
And so with coaching, we are looking at patterns, aren't we? We're looking at patterns of behavior. Some are good, some are bad. We're looking at missing patterns. And so in a way, a shadow work really belongs in coaching whenever we're working with somebody who wants to move to another place, a higher state of being, you might say, a transformation.
Yes, yes. And I do believe as well that the coach approach can be used to shadow work. And as coaches, we are forward thinking and we're helping our clients live to their potential and create extraordinary, fulfilling lives. But I don't think we can get there until we take a real look at ourselves. And so many would feel that, well, shadow work, that belongs in therapy. But with coaching, we work with people who are whole, who are complete, and who have the strength and the wherewithal to move forward. That's why they ask us. And of course, we need to know our boundaries. And in some cases, shadow work may be needed in the domain of therapy. But the clients that are appropriate for coaching, I think, are also very good clients to do shadow work.
Absolutely. And we're doing them a disservice if we stay at a shallow level. I mean, somebody could come in, let's say, looking for, for support in a weight loss venture. They want to lose weight, and so they hire a coach to help them do that. But there may be underlying issues, underlying shadow issues, which would surface with a skilled coach who can ask the right questions. Why does this client want to lose weight? And it may have nothing to do with, wanting to fit into a smaller size clothing, but it may have everything to do with something that's been repressed or some memory that's been forgotten.
Yes, indeed, indeed. And there is a danger in shadow work. And I think the bigger danger is not doing it.
Absolutely. Because then we stay in a state of ignorance and projection happens and we live a lie. We have this false persona and we don't know it's false.
That's right. That's right. And Maria Louise Freire, a student of Carl Jung, had said that neurosis is having to be somebody that you're not, having to conform to some external definitions of who or what you should be. And it often happens around midlife. We get that summons to really figure out, who am I really, and how do I live a life that's genuine, authentic, and whole. And I believe we can't become whole until we really do take a look at these shadow parts and integrate them. And you could say that's becoming holy. As we heal, that is probably the origins of holy, that when we heal and we integrate all of these parts of ourselves, we become whole and thus holy.
which is related to the whole idea of epiphany moments,
Mhm.
which, the ICF basically focuses on, what is the insight, what is the wisdom, what is the new learning that the client is getting, and that's an epiphany. So
Mhm.
epiphany work is holy work, and holy work does involve the shadow. So
Yeah.
it's sort of interesting to look at it that way.
Yes, certainly, certainly. Many religions, they look at the light, which is appropriate, but if they ignore the darker aspects of the shadow, then that shadow can wreak havoc on the way that religion is actually being practiced. So, for instance, every war is a holy war throughout history.
And
Every
how
war.
unholy war is. I mean, how
That's
can,
right.
it's
That's
the
right.
unholiest act has this veneer of holiness.
Yes.
And I've mentioned this to you before, but also I would say that that the epidemic of pedophilia in the Catholic Church
Mhm.
is shadow material. It's
Mhm.
repression that has then led to this, and so.
Right.
So again, unresolved shadow work that the institutional church needs to undertake.
Right. Decades, if not hundreds of years of shadow.
Yes, yes. Well, the shadow also goes back, unfortunately, to things like the Crusades, and
Yes.
we could go to or the burning of witches at the stake. I mean,
Yep, that's
that sort
right.
of is pretty horrible to think about that. The Inquisition,
That's
yeah,
right.
the
That's right.
Inquisition, yes. But I suppose every institution, every religious organization probably has its own shadow that it has to
Think
examine.
so. And every organization, business, nonprofit, religious institution, even families as well.
Yes.
And I think the key is it takes a lot of courage, and it takes a certain level of consciousness to be able to move beyond that. And I don't believe we can be really able to consciously create and live to our potential unless we embrace all these aspects of ourselves.
And because if we don't, we're living basically as in fragments. We're living,
Yes,
we're no longer an individuated whole human being, but we're sort of in those little pieces that are glued together, and the glue's not quite working.
that's right. That's right.
Yes, yes.
And those parts we don't like, we often project onto others and then demonize them. But we have to recognize whenever we get angry or feel negative emotions like hate, there's a part of ourselves that we're putting onto others. And the question is to ask, well, what part of myself have I not owned yet? That when I see in this person or group that makes me so angry. And I think that could be really enlightening when we really get to that point of owning those parts of ourselves that we tend to split off and put onto other groups.
And this is what makes coaching so necessary and so exciting, that it's the perfect place to address shadow work without getting into therapy, without getting into religious practice either, but just basically to look at it in terms of the human experience, and how can we as move towards greater self-knowledge, greater self-awareness, um, simply by looking more deeply into ourselves and looking more intently at that mirror, and the shadows that are reflected in that mirror as well.
Right. And thus we become more whole. And as coaches, then that's the process that we need to embark on too, that we can't take anyone to a place that we haven't gone. And as we do our work, we're better able to help others do their work and go through their processes too.
And we can't be complacent and just say, oh, I've arrived, because
No,
we're always arriving. None of us has arrived. I mean, that's the problem with, when sometimes people end up as gurus and everyone's following them. Well, the expectation is this person has arrived and doesn't have clay feet. And
yeah,
too often the feet are, made of clay or dust, whatever. But to see ourselves as on the journey, in process, I think that creates the kind of humility we need for this work.
that's right. And our clients are whole, complete. And it's up to them. We're not the gurus, so to speak, or the knowers. There's a lot of shadow with that, but to recognize that we are human and that it's a community, and it's kind of like a process, midwifing, birthing, however you want to put it, into a new kind of consciousness that is sorely needed in this world today.
And perhaps it's where the future can actually happen through coaching. If we coach enough individuals, or there's enough transformation, and these
Mm,
people in turn influence enough people,
mm.
then perhaps there's some hope.
Right. And Carl Jung said that years ago in the 50s when the hydrogen bomb was first tested and exploded. someone in a lecture asked him, Dr. Young, is there hope for the world? And he thought for a moment. He said, there is hope if enough of us do our work, our inner work. And so I think coaching can help quite a few people do that inner work.
And that's our conviction. So I think this is probably a good place to end. I hope everybody has enjoyed listening to our introductory comments on coaching and the shadow. And there is definitely more to come. So until it happens, be well.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Peter.